Hello, and help me welcome our guest, Kevin Scully. Kevin, welcome to People's View.
Thank you very much.
And tell us a little bit, tell our audience about yourself and why you're running for a representative in the New Hampshire legislature.
Okay, well, let me begin by saying thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to sit with you and to also speak to the members of our city.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, from Ward 6, so I'm very interested in reaching out to the folks there who might decide I might be the right person to represent their interests. I'd like to give you a little background about myself first, and I'll get to why I think I'm running, because I want, I guess, tell my story, because I'd like to think I'm worth knowing, but I don't think a lot of people know me yet. So I'm going to take this opportunity to present myself to them.
Good, this is what it's for.
Okay. Well, I am one of 5 children. I was born in Everett, Massachusetts, and raised in Malden. My father was a postal worker who had served in the Army. And my mother was an Irish farm girl, so he was first generation on his side, and he went over and married an Irish girl and brought her back here. My mother definitely loved my dad. She was also excited about the idea of living in America and having her children born and raised here, because she really understood what this country represents in terms of the land of opportunity. And I'd like to think that we, her children, have made the most of that. We certainly tried. So as I said, I was born. Well, I won't tell you what year I was born, but one of 5. There were 2 older sisters. I had an older brother and I had a younger brother. When we grew up, I would not exactly say we were well-to-do. Unfortunately, my father passed away when I was 11, and my mom had to go and start working, to make ends meet, and suddenly it was the 5 kids, and I guess you'd say we were technically latchkey kids, but they didn't have that term back then. But we took care of ourselves and watched after ourselves. I shared a room with my 2 brothers. I actually shared a bed with my younger brother, Aiden, until I was 11 years old. And we find, it was a house, 5 kids, you got to put them somewhere.
Yeah.
But the one thing my mother did absolutely insist on was that we got a good education. And I don't know where she found the money to do that, but she sent us to parochial school. We got our education. I went to BC High, and then I went to Boston College, so I'm a double eagle. And I got a degree in geology and geophysics, so I'm actually a scientist, not a politician. And my first job was moving down to Louisiana, and I worked in the Louisiana oil fields for a company called Schlumberger Well Services, doing something called borehole geophysics.
Yes.
And so it's funny because you see those old movies where they drill a hole and the oil would shoot out of the ground and they all start dancing around, and then somebody would light a cigarette and things would go very badly from there. So what they started doing was they'd use something called drilling muds, where they control the pressure in the hole, but you never really were quite sure what was down there. So we'd bring out our geophysical testing equipment, we'd send it down, and I'm actually in the 5 Mile Club. So I logged at that time the freshest fresh mud well ever drilled in Louisiana. And
oh, really?
I spent about 3.5 years down there, and that was a real eye-opener for an Irish Catholic kid from Eastern Massachusetts to go down to Acadian, French-Canadian Louisiana. It was a little bit of a culture shock, honestly.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I mean, English was a second language for a lot of the people working down there. But it was also, it was a gun culture. I mean, I had never held or seen a gun before, and everybody was driving around there with guns in the back of their pickup trucks, and I was like, oh my God, this is, crazy. But, 3 years later, I had mine.
I worked in Texas, you had to have one.
Yeah, you wouldn't be self-respecting person, you didn't have that. Yeah. But it gave me a sense of a different way of looking at things. Which I think was very helpful to me. Now, when the domestic oil industry collapsed back in '81, I remember they called it the Reagan recession. And, at that point, I moved back up here. As it turned out, I moved into a neighborhood that was a leukemia cluster associated with Wells G&H.
Oh, really?
Do you remember that? There was a movie, a book called The Civil Action, and a movie was made of that. Well, I moved into that neighborhood. And, the poor man across the street and his great guy and his wife, they actually lost one of their children. So I was directly associated with that. And at that point, here I was, this unemployed oil field geologist looking around for something to do, and I suddenly was made aware of the fact of the importance of the environment in terms of our personal health. So at that point, I was selling furniture at a company called M. Brown in Boston. I'm dating myself here because I don't think they're there anymore. But I went to MIT. I talked my way into the School of Civil Engineering.
Oh, really?
Took a couple of courses in hydrology, groundwater hydrology and hydrology. recast myself as a hydrogeologist, and then got into the environmental cleanup business, and I've been doing that for the last 30 years.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, so I moved up here 30 years ago. Not because of a job, but because I wanted to live up here. I became increasingly disenchanted with the monoculture of Massachusetts in terms of the one-party rule, and what I consider to be this increasing intrusion into our everyday lives. I fell in love with Live Free or Die, New Hampshire, and I decided I want to come up here. A funny thing that happened to us is we moved in. We hadn't even unpacked the boxes yet. We put them all in the houses. We stayed overnight, parked out on the street. We got up in the morning, there was a parking ticket on the car for parking in front of our own house overnight. I was like, wait a second, this is Live Free or Die, New Hampshire. You know, I didn't know about the local ordinance, but that was my first taste of the idea that, you know, people passing laws actually have impacts on other people's lives. And you got to be very careful about how you do that. So I really became, over the years, I think it was Winston Churchill said, if you're not, you know, a liberal when you're 20, you have no heart, and if you're not a conservative when you're 40, you have no brain. I'm not trying to insult anybody, those are Winston Churchill's words, but I think there's some truth to that. And I really did, as I started to learn and mature and read, came to understand a lot better, I think, a lot more about human nature and the fact that we live in an imperfect world, and the fact that we should try to make it better for each other, but we'll never be able to make it perfect, and you're a fool to try, and sometimes that can even be dangerous when the government tries to go too far and to overreach. And so, you know, my basic philosophy of government is somewhat of a conservative philosophy. Again, I don't think that it's not a perfect world. We can't make it a perfect world. We shouldn't try to make it a perfect world. Pretty good is sometimes good enough. And I think that very often people tend to look at the imperfections of our government system and the fact that it can't cure all the problems, and they immediately think, oh, we have to do something. And I don't really think that that's the case in a lot of cases. I think we really need to be very, very careful before we use the awesome power of government to start changing our society, because it can have some terrible and unintended consequences. One story that I read that I thought, I'll give you one from overseas and I'll talk about one here. In the 1950s in communist China, Chairman Mao, who, you know, the great mass murderer, also known as the great helmsman, decided that he was going to improve the country. He wanted to improve the grain production of the country. And he found out that, you know, the sparrows that were living there were eating too much of the grain, or so he felt. So he embarked on a nationwide program to kill all of the sparrows, assuming it was going to increase the grain production. Well, what happened was they killed the sparrows, and the sparrows stopped eating the grain, but they stopped eating the bugs that were eating the grain. And then what they found out was that the sparrows were eating a lot more of the bugs. And when they were gone, there were a lot more bugs. And when the locusts came, they had mass starvation, and they estimate between 30 and 50 million people died of famine because the government decided that things were not good and they wanted to make them a little better, and that's what happened as a result. And, you know, in the home front, I think we could look at the Obamacare and what they did. And again, I think it was a situation where we had a pretty good system. 85% of the people had medical coverage. Most people were actually very happy with it. We have, you know, our longevity kept increasing. By, I think, most objective measures, we were doing pretty well. But the Democrat Party suddenly declared this a national emergency, and we had to do something, and they ran through this.
15% had to get it.
Yeah, in order to try to make it a perfect world, you know, not a darn good one. And when they did that, they just screwed up everything. And we're seeing it's still just playing out right now in terms of how pernicious their effects were on trying to make things perfect and having exactly the opposite results. I mean, the fact that they instituted the 30-hour week pushed all the companies to make people part-time. The cost, okay, fine, we're subsidizing the cost of insurance for people who can't afford it, but the deductible is $5,000. They still effectively don't have insurance. And meanwhile, we're paying all these premiums for nothing and hurting the people who had insurance before because the employers are dropping them. So I'm hoping that, again, we come to our senses nationally and fix that. You know, we obviously have a local version of that, which was the Medicaid expansion. and we really need to do something about that as well. And I guess I'll talk a little bit about that later.
Well, just go ahead and talk about it right now.
All right. Well, again, I think you, I'm sure, know much more about this issue than I do, but I've been studying on it and trying to understand. And it seems that Medicaid expansion was the answer to a problem we didn't have.
Right.
In that everybody in New Hampshire had medical coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody was ever turned away at a hospital, and nobody ever died in the street because they weren't being seen. Mm-hmm. Instead, what they decided to do was have another drastic expansion of medical insurance coverage, the largest welfare expansion, I think, in New Hampshire's history. Mm-hmm. And it's costing us, I think, if I remember correctly, I went on and watched some of the presentations to the mm-hmm. legislature, and if I remember correctly, they were saying it was going to basically be budget neutral.
That's right.
Oh, yeah, no, it won't cost a blessed thing. Yeah. Everybody's going to be covered.
That's the magic words to sell anything. Yeah, it's not going to cost us anything more, and we don't need any more employees, to can cover it.
That's like the fourth great lie, right? It won't cost you anything. But of course we know that.
That's the mantra up there.
Yeah, and that was not the case. Yeah. And so now we're spending over the biennial basically $1 billion more
probably
than we were spending before to have the same level of coverage we had before. And every dollar you spend in that area is a buck you don't have to spend somewhere else to fix something where we really could fix something. So by the way, one of my, if I may say this, should I be elected by my constituency, and I think I'm the right person to send up there, that will be one of the legislative agendas for me, which is to vote to roll that back. We will be better and stronger if we do.
There are a number of things that we have to look at up there. You will not lack for something, whatever committee you get on, find something interesting to do. Right now, the administration up there is really not implementing what we tried to build with the new budget last year. They still haven't worked out the bugs. We still have a waiting line for mental health. Right. We still have other things that money hasn't been spent on the heroin epidemic.
Right. Money is allocated, right, to help people, and it hasn't been.
It's just that the mechanism, the bureaucracy up there is slowing down everything. And it's unfortunate. We find that other errors are being made that show that the effectiveness, or you could call it just efficiency, but I like to call it effectiveness because it's doing the right things right. It's just not there. And it's a shame because you have a lot of people. You'll find that a lot of mid-level managers are very good, very trying, but it's the top-level management that just bogs the process for whatever reason. Either they don't know how to handle it, or they're slowing it down to make somebody else look bad.
Well, another reason I think to elect a Republican for the governorships, because I guess he has to appoint the commissioners, and I'm hoping that we have somebody with a really good business sense who can try to make some of these things happen.
Well, the candidate we have has a business experience, so that's fortunate. He knows how to run a company, and what do you say, 200 or so, or 400 employees?
I think peak times, he said, Chris Newton said 800.
800, that's right.
Yeah.
But even the whole facility up there is pretty nice. I don't know if you've actually been up there.
I've skied it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, besides health, which is going to take the large portion of our time because it's 40-some% of our budget. I think really what we have to look at, it's probably not the right time to do it, is breaking it up. It's too big.
Right. No, I've heard that from
smaller units.
From more than one person. It just may simply be too big to manage.
That's
and there is some efficiencies that can be had by bringing it down to smaller, more manageable units. Well, that's something I guess we'll have to look at. What I would say is that I'm very hesitant, again, to use the power of government. This may sound counterintuitive, but I mean, I've heard a lot of politicians, and they would come and they would brag about all the laws they passed. And I guess in some respects you could almost liken a lawmaker to a hammer, where everything starts to look like a nail, and the solution to every problem is to pass a law about that, And I think it's important that we have prudence, and that we really look at something long and hard to say, is government really the answer here? And my, guiding stars are really, does it help people in terms of their quality of life? Does it preserve their liberties? And does it preserve their wealth? We have to have a certain level of government to have a civil society. I think when the government becomes too large, it becomes its own problem. And of course, you know that the size of government is directly tied to the cost of government. And when the government costs too much, it becomes its own problem. And it's really beholden on us to make sure that we understand the limitations of what government can and should do effectively, and don't try to go too far and do too much.
No. Well, back in 2011 and 12, when I was up there, we formed a committee for rules and regulations looking at how the different agencies implemented some of the laws that you said. And they were, in some cases, very heavy-handed and not working because, I mean, their clients are our voters.
Right.
And we should be doing something that allows them to do their business or do their, with that, as long as they're not harming somebody, with as much ease from the government as possible.
Right.
I think we're going to have to try to, if we get the majority, I think we'll probably have to start that again because they have dropped completely some of the things that were all set up at the end of 2012 when the Democrats got back in the power. They haven't done anything since then.
Right.
So.
And it's too bad because laws seem to be forever.
That's right.
Even the bad ones. And
right.
I'd really love to see, I'd almost love to see a law passed where for every law you pass, you have to take 3 off the books. You know, because you'd actually start.
You wouldn't have any trouble doing that.
Yeah, winning it down. And it would also make you think about, boy, you know, I really want this. Do I really need that? You know, it would probably be good if we almost had a sunset provision for every law. So they all have to go, we go back to them and re-examine them to say, was it a good idea then? Is it still a good idea now? And yeah, because government seems to always grow and grow and grow. And I think, again, it becomes its own problem. So somebody has to be that person to be the regulator of
talking about from the top down, let's get into education. What are your viewpoints on the education system where a lot's coming from the top and it's not settling very well in the bottom?
Well, it's funny because actually I was walking through the ward and I actually spoke with one of the teachers.
Oh.
I have to tell you, I have my humor's got me into trouble at times before, but she said, what do you think about education? And I said, everybody should have one. And it's true, I think they do. But I am very, very concerned with what they're doing now with Common Core. And I think, again, there's an incredible amount of arrogance for this certain group of unelected people to actually believe that they understand what our children need to know and understand for the workplace of the future. We can't even predict the weather next week.
That's right.
And these people are saying now we're going to have this very specific zone of knowledge because that's what they're going to need and nothing else. Again, I think it's really, really arrogant to think that you can throw away 2,500 years. Now, granted, it was trial and error, but the result of that is we've come up with an incredible system of education. And if you do it right, you give somebody a well-rounded liberal arts education that makes them a Swiss Army knife with all of the skills they need to handle themselves in an uncertain future. I think when people start to say, you need this and only this, they are doing those children a tremendous disservice. And so for that reason, I am totally opposed to this top-down command thing. I think we who love and cherish our children are the people who are best able to decide what they should learn and how they should learn it. And it's worked very well in the past. This is not broke. Don't fix it.
Well, I think that we're going to have trouble with what we have is a Board of Education and a Department of Education.
Yep.
They say, you know, you don't have to follow our rules, but if you don't follow them, you don't get any of the grants. You know?
Well, you know, I have to tell you something. I've actually asked this question. It's my understanding that we're getting about 7% of our budget from the federal government to pay for our education. What's the cost of compliance? How much is it actually costing us to get that 7%? I'm guessing it's far in a way higher than 7%. Sure. And if somebody would sit down and do the math, I think we might actually look at this and say, huh, you know something, federal government?
It's not worth it.
No thanks.
Yeah, that's right.
We'll take care of this ourselves.
There are a number of people that are pushing that concept.
Well, I like those people. But
you'll meet some up there then.
Okay.
But it is something that's a very big question up there.
Right.
And some of the other things that have to do with our children are the laws of how some of the health agencies are taking care of these situations that involve children and parents and their environment and everything. And it gets into the heroin problem, or it gets into just people not being very good parents or whatever, poverty. All things are mixed, and we try to fix everything. As you said, you try
Right.
to fix more than you need to fix.
Or to have the wisdom to understand that there's some things you simply can't fix. And which is to say, I would never wish an unhappy childhood on anybody, but what's the alternative? Government controls all of our lives and
Yeah.
our children, and
Right.
I think that's a terrible mistake again. And I'd have to say I prefer dangerous freedom to the security of total control by a government over us.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you find some areas that you'd find you could help in that area too.
Well, I'd like to, again, I think that when the true principles of conservatism are correctly espoused, that people buy them. They listen to them. They understand. It's just tough, in this day and age of the 15-second soundbite,
Oh yeah.
to try to really sit down and walk people through the argument to say, this is why this makes sense. Even if it doesn't seem like it solves the problem in the short term, it's the better way to do it in the long term. And we're back to prudence again,
Well, yeah, and not only is a 15-second soundbite on TV, the newspapers don't do much better
Right.
in getting into the details. And what we try to do sometimes on this program is to get people in here to talk about some issue like that in a lot more detail, so that we can try to show the perspective of what a lot of us up there in the legislature are thinking about, and how we see a solution that might not be so heavy-handed as it is from some of the other people that are up there, just trying to think that we know better than everybody else.
No, I think it's very important to listen to the constituency, to hear what they have to say. On the other hand, again, I try to, when I talk to people, when I'm doing my door knocking and speaking to them face to face, I also say, please understand who I am and what I believe in, because there are certain things that I positively believe are right, and on those I can't budge. I won't budge. So know that going in. if you elect me.
Well, that's a good way of going. I mean, you're new to being a politician, if you will. You're not really a politician from the negative sense, but a politician from the standpoint of wanting to do better. You know the operation can be done better from your business experience, from your personal experience, and everything like that. That's how I got into it too. You just feel that they're just wasting money up there, if nothing else.
Right. Right. You don't want to do that, because again, it's a precious resource and it's taken from other folks.
That's right.
I hate that expression when I hear, "Oh, it's the federal government's money," as if it didn't come from our pockets too.
Came out from the other side of the pants.
Oh yeah, yes. And to think that no, we have to. And here's the thing too. I think that we have to really go back. I consider myself, again, I grew up as a Kennedy Catholic, and those words that he said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. If we actually approach civics and the public life and politics with that in mind, that it's not just, hey, what can I get from somebody else, and can I pick his pocket to, satisfy my immediate need, but rather what can we all agree to sacrifice a little bit for the greater good, and may not get everything we want, but understand that it's going to leave somebody else with a couple of bucks in their pocket and their freedom intact. I think if we all act in that way with a spirit of goodwill, we will have a virtuous circle, and our society will do better.
Definitely. Are you? Do you have enough people to help you in your campaign?
Well, actually, at this point, it's almost a one-man show, and I have to
start that way, but you got to have a couple people.
Yeah,
there.
I'm going to need some folks to probably go out and wave signs and things like that. I still feel I'm the best person to espouse my own beliefs.
Knocking on doors are the best thing for you to do to get your face out.
And that's what I'm doing. I'm going to continue to do that. There's a lot of folks, I haven't talked to everybody there. I've left my literature now. Whether it just went into the circular file or not, I don't know. I mean, God knows we're inundated with the stuff, and I wouldn't take it personally. But I am going to try to talk to as many people as I can so they understand. I think it's important to have an alternate view and a choice. In this case, in this election, I'm the only Republican running in my ward, and so
you got a chance.
And, and I mean, they have to pick three. Yeah. So do they want one
Same
vision.
old, same old.
Yeah, one vision of the world and one way to approach things, which I consider to be like that collectivist vision of, you know, the group deciding what's best for everybody else, as opposed to the individual/libertarian view of things, which is to say, I'm a grown person. I can make up my own mind. I'll take care of my family, thank you very much. I'll chart my own course, and I'll kick in the funds necessary to again, have a good, civil, stable society. But please don't tell me what to do. That's why I moved here.
That's right, yeah. Well, one of the things that you have to do is, though, is make sure that your face gets out there.
Right.
And whatever you can do, appearing at local things or just continuing knocking on doors. You know, you can go to some meetings they have. I don't know whether you attend anything like that, but you know, that's something else that you can just.
Yeah, well, as I said, I know I'm not doing this perfectly. This is my first time ever doing this, but I am putting in what I consider to be a good effort. I'm trying to espouse what I consider to be my philosophy of life and government to folks, in the hopes that they'll agree with that. And if they do, then I would obviously ask them to vote for me, so I can go up and represent their interests in Concord.
Well, if you have a website, you can take this and put it on your web.
Oh, I do. It's by the way, it's Kevin Scully, KevinscullyNH, as in New Hampshire.org.
Okay.
And
good.
I'm very proud of it. I built it myself.
Oh.
And
very good.
yeah, I put something on there called Interesting Links, and there's a 10-minute video on there called The American Form of Government. It's the best 10-minute
Very
civics
good.
lesson I ever got. I would encourage people to go look at that.
Okay, very good. That's something, and we'll see you down at the meetings. As you know, people, we have the Nashua City Republican Committee, which meets every second Thursday of the month at the Crown Plaza. So we invite you to attend our meetings and listen to some of the people, like Kevin, talk about government. Okay? Thank you very
so
much, Kevin.
All right, pleasure.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.